3 days old when my 4-year-old brother William died, leaving me to be the big brother of the family. Growing up in Kentucky, I used to like to visit my grandmother's house in Paint Lick. The slave cabins were a ways from the house, and in the evenings, I liked to go to the cabins and listen to the tall tales they would tell. They told scary stories, and I would stay until it was almost dark. I would be a little scared, so I would run home as fast as I could before it was too dark. I married my beautiful sweetheart, Mary Jane Sadler, in September of 1866, after I returned from the war. When I was born in Kentucky, I was baptized in infancy by the Reverend Jimmy Barnes, and I was named for my uncle, Carrie Allen Wiley, an old-school Presbyterian minister who was educated in Danville, Kentucky. I seem to have been a favorite of the colored woman who did the cooking in the house of my grandmother. When the woman made cornbread, she would pat out the rounds or cakes and place them around inside the Dutch oven. Then she would pat out a little cake and put it in the middle, just for me. Growing up on my father's farm in Madison County, Kentucky, I was educated in the area public schools. I attended school through boyhood and on into young manhood. I used to refer to a summer school I attended as grammar school, since grammar was the only subject taught during these terms. After reaching young manhood, I taught one term of school in Kentucky and was sick at the close of the term. My uncle David Wiley came to Texas with our family. Others joined the wagon train as we went along, and we all traveled together. Once the family settled in Collin County, Texas, there was some talk of going over to Wise County, where my stepmother, Mahala, had 2 brothers, Sam and William Perrin. I rode horseback over to Wise County to look the situation over. When I came back, I reported that I would be staying in Collin County, but the others could go if they liked. When we arrived in Texas, I took a teaching position at the old Highland School north of the town of Anna, Texas. I stayed at the home of Mahala Foster, who was a cousin to my stepmother, Mahala. Once again, I was sick at the close of term. I began to think that confinement might not be good for my health. I had an offer to pursue photography in California, but my sisters talked me out of that, so I took up carpentry. In the summer of 1859, I went to Missouri with my friend Abner Perrin. We bought some sheep and drove them back to Texas. Then, at the end of 1860, war broke out. In October of 1861, at McKinney, Texas, listed in the Confederate Army, Company 1, 9th Texas Infantry, Smith's Tennessee Brigade, Cheatham's Division, Polk's Corps, Army of Tennessee. My first captain was Joe Dixon. The first colonel was Sam Bell Maxey. I served in Cheatham's, McGowan's, Walker's, and Morrow's divisions, and after Murfreesboro, we were in Ector's brigade. I was slightly wounded in back of my hand at Murfreesboro and shot through my left wrist on April 3, 1863 at Spanish Fort, Tennessee. I was in the battles of Perryville, Kentucky, and Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Jackson, Mississippi, Chickamauga, Resaca, New Hope Church, Rome, Kennesaw Mountain, and all the fighting around Atlanta, personally complimented on the field at Murfreesboro by General Cheatham. My regiment was reported in a special order, and we were voted the thanks of the Confederate Congress, and presented with a fine flag by the ladies of Richmond, Virginia. We went into battle with 285 men, and had 128 killed or wounded. My colonel, William H. Young, had 2 horses shot and killed under him. Our battle flag had 56 holes in it, and 1 shell struck it. We had several men killed while carrying it. Dear Father, Mother, brothers, and sisters, I received your letter of September 17th at Knoxville, soon after we came from Kentucky. I also received the one you sent by Mr. Williams. He landed safely with our clothes. Tell James that his coat was very acceptable and that I shall not forget him for it.
Carey Allen had 3 sisters, Elizabeth, Margaret, and little Mary, as well as 3 brothers, George, whom they called Rob, and of course, little Tommy, who was just 5 years old in 1862. His brother Rob, who had also enlisted in the Confederate Army, was 20 in 1862, and his younger brother, James, was just 17 when he came down with pneumonia and died. George and Mahala had decided it was best not to tell their soldier sons about the death of their brother until they were home, safe and sound. When Carey Allen wrote this letter, he had no idea that James no longer needed his coat.
I am well clothed now except a hat and shoes. They are having them made for us as fast as they can at this place. And I will get home soon. I expect to get shoes tomorrow. It is 1 year today since we were sworn into the service, and how many of our once happy company is left? Over half of them are gone. Some have been discharged, some have fallen on the field of battle, while a larger portion have fallen by the hand of disease. 1 year more, and how many will be left? I was in Colonel Walter Chenal's regiment from Madison County, Kentucky. He came out as we did. I saw a good many men that I used to know. They said Uncle James Gates would come if he could have gotten off. The boys said that the Union men treated Uncle James and others bad.
This must have been the time that Carey Allen was near his old Kentucky home and would have enjoyed a visit with the folks so much. He was advised by a man with whom he talked not to risk seeing them. This man knew his Uncle James Gates, and had seen him a few days earlier, and reported they were all well. He said that feeling was running high. Carey Allen took this man's advice, and didn't attempt to see his kinfolk. There was only part of the following letter, and no date, but since the Battle of Chattanooga was in June of 1863, it no doubt was written in the winter of 1862 to 1863.
We have got 2 days' rations cooked up to leave here. We will go to Chattanooga, but I don't know where we will go from there. I fear there will be some hard fighting done this winter and next spring. On our retreat from Camp Dick Robinson, we started on 2 pounds of bread, 4 pounds of pork. This had to last us for 4 days. We then drew half rations for a few days. Then 1/3 pound of flour per day. Then, one day, we only got 1 ear of corn each, and beef without salt. This was tight living, you may suppose. And march 20 miles per day. And pack your ammunition together with your cartridge box and accoutrements, which weigh 16 pounds. Gun, blanket, 15 more pounds. Beside your knapsack, clothes and provisions, and canteen full of water. In all, about 50 pounds. I am nearly barefooted. We are on the move. We are at the railroad station waiting for the trains to take us, I suppose, to Meridian, about 90 miles from here. But the boys all think that we are going back to Bragg's army again. I hope that we do not go. I had rather be where there is a small army. We are much closer to home here, and apt to hear from home. I am sending this letter by Mr. Maxwell, who was discharged from our company. There are a good many men getting discharges and furloughs now. P.S. I learned that we are ordered to Bragg's army again. I hope not. Dear Father, I received your letter of November 22, which I was very glad to get. I wrote you a few days ago and sent the letter by J. M. Robinson of our company, who has been transferred to that side of the river. But as J. K. Jenkins has got a furlough and starts home in the morning, I concluded to write again. We are in our winter quarters now at this place, and I hope that we stay here until spring. We are very well fixed in our new cabins, and are getting tolerable plenty to eat. I am going to stay until next fall. Then, if I live, I am going to come home. Even if I have to run away. If the boys that get to go home would come back, then we could all get to go. But none of them ever come back. You must write by Jenkins, as I think that he will be sure to come back. Tell Brother James to stick to the mill if he can. James Browning and James Boone send their love and respect to you all. I received your letter by J. K. Jenkins. Also one about 10 days ago, by Lieutenant Crooks of Paris. I was sorry to hear that brother was wounded, but glad to know that it was slight. There has not been a day for over 2 months, but what I have heard the boom of cannon and the rattle of small arms. We have had a hard time of it. We have not cooked a meal to eat for over 2 months. Our bread is cooked in the rear. We draw bacon, some coffee, and vegetables about once a week. And some tobacco. We get plenty to eat. I've been so close to the Yanks that I could hear them cock their guns and see the roll of fire from the guns. I heard that cousin William Phelps was captured by our cavalry and is now in a Confederate prison. I am going to find out and write him. He and Jay Pruitt are both in the Yankee Army. I would like to see him. I think I could convince him of his folly. I must close.
Carey Allen's father, George, had a sister named Rebecca, who married a man named William Phelps. They had a son, also named William. The Phelps family supported the Union, and both father and son enlisted in the Union Army. The prison that held Carey Allen's cousin William Phelps was none other than Andersonville Prison, notorious for being the most inhumane prison during the war. Most inmates did not survive, and many starved. Both cousin William and his father perished during the war.
Father, still pray for me, and God will protect me, and I will return home a far better man than when I left. But if I should fall, I hope to meet you all in heaven. I have read my Bible through 2 or 3 times. I read some nearly every day.
Carey Allen brought his Bible home with him, and it has been cherished through the years by his family. He served the entire 4 years without ever once being fortunate enough to draw a furlough. He was wounded when he was sitting in a trench, resting his chin in his left hand. This was the 3rd day of May at Spanish Fort, Alabama. A mini-ball, which is a flattened bullet, dropped over into the trench, and went through his left wrist. He was so stunned at first, that he didn't realize where he was hit. Then he saw the hole in his wrist. The mini-ball dropped down into the dust at his feet. He picked it up and brought it home. Cousin Goda Gates Roan, his daughter, has it now, also a $100 bill, and a $10 bill in Confederate money that he brought home. George Robertson Gates' sister, Rebecca Phelps, was the first child born to Epps and Patience Gates. Carey Allen's daughter, Goda Gates Roan, has 2 letters written by Rebecca to her brother, George Robertson Gates. One is dated February 16, 1861, from Willisburg, Washington County, Kentucky. Rebecca had lost contact with George and wanted them to write if they received the note she sent. And she would write again. The second letter, dated June 8, 1866, was to George in Mahala, no location given. In this letter, she describes the death of her husband, William Phelps, November 26, 1863, and also the death of her son William. He was taken prisoner by the Confederate Army, December 24, 1863, and died in Andersonville Prison, the following year, August 13 or 14, 1864. She wrote that all her family and in-laws believe in the Constitution, and were on the Union side during the Civil War. She mentioned the sale of a piece of land where we first bought, to pay George and Martha, referring to their sister Martha Patience Harvey, who at the time, was living in Missouri. The following letter was written by James Gates, of Madison County, Kentucky, to his brother George in McKinney, Texas.
Dear brother, I take up my pen to write to you once more. It has been a long time since we have been permitted to correspond. I was very glad to hear from you all once more, and to hear that you was all well. I was so sorry to hear of Jimmy's death, but I am glad to hear of the boys getting home safe. I never expected to hear of Carey getting home alive. I suppose he had a very hard time of it. His command has had some very hard fighting to do. We are all well and have good health since you heard from us last. William Phelps is dead. He died 2 years ago last November, and his son William died at Andersonville Prison sometime during the war. We had a very hard time during the war. We had both armies in the state. I lost a good deal during the war, but I was very thankful we was all permitted to live. Goods of every kind is very high. And so provisions. Calico, 30 cents. Cotton cloth, 40 cents. Spun cotton, 60 cents. Sugar, 25 cents. Wheat is $2 per bushel. Hogs is from $8 to 10. Cattle is from 4 to 7 cents, owing to quality. Horses are very low. I have not finished collecting your money. I have collected $1,200 or $1,300 for you. There's about $100 behind. It is in greenback. It would have been making a great sacrifice to buy the gold. I would had to give $2 for one. If you want, I can get it for about 60 cents. Jesse Stevenson is dead, and I had to sue the estate. He may be able to pay all, I don't know. They have sold out the land. I have been waiting for an answer from Missouri before I would write to you. George, I want to see you all very bad. I would be glad to see you in the spring. You must be sure to come and bring some of your children with you and spend the summer in old Kentucky. You would not know any of my children if you was to see them. They have grown so much, for are about grown.
When I came home from the war with a crippled hand, I realized I would have to give up the idea of becoming a carpenter. So I took up farming. Me and Mary Jane settled near my father in Mahala, northeast of McKinney. I did a little freighting by wagon and team between McKinney and Jefferson, Texas. We lived on this Collin County farm 12 years, and 6 of our children were born here. In 1878, I became discouraged with this farm and traded farms with my brother Rob in Cook County. So, in December of that year, me and Mary Jane and our 3 kids, Eddie, Mary, and Garrett, moved to the new farm 2 miles southwest of Valley View on Boulevard Road. In the spring of 1879, I moved the 65 head of cattle from Collin County to Cook County and became a stockman. We had been members of the Cumberland Presbyterian Church, but since there was no Presbyterian church in Valley View, we joined the Methodist Church. We had 4 more children there, Goda, twins, James and John, who unfortunately died shortly after birth, and our precious little Carrie Belle, born in October of 1886.
It was a grievous shock when in January of 1887, just 3 months after Carrie Belle was born, Mary Jane went to meet her maker. I buried her in the local cemetery near Valley View, next to her twin boys.
After Mary Jane's death, her sister and family, Mr. and Mrs. John Hancock, with their little son, Beckton, moved in with Carrie and the children for 1 year. Aunt Puss, as Martha Hancock was known, took care of the baby through the day, but when night came, Carrie took her and her bottle to bed with him, and cared for her through the night. For 8 years, Carrie played the part of mother and father to his children. And he did a wonderful job of it.
In 1895, I married Mrs. Elizabeth Jane Graves in the home of her brother and sister-in-law, Mr. and Mrs. Mac Williams, near Valley View. The Reverend M. Dunn, Methodist minister, officiating. 10 years later, in 1905, we sold the farm in Cook County and bought 2 farms in Coke County, out in West Texas. On December 30th of that year, Goda, Elizabeth, and I boarded the passenger train in Valley View and headed for San Angelo, Texas. We arrived the following evening and spent the night.
The next morning we boarded the mail hack, driven by Bill Dawson, for Robert Lee. By noon we were at Pecan Lot, which was a grove of pecan trees on the county line of Tom Green and Coke counties.
A family living there furnished Bill Dawson and his passengers with their noon meal. Then, with a team of fresh horses, we started for Robert Lee. We spent the night with Mr. and Mrs. F.K. Popplewell and chartered a boxcar for household goods, some farming implements, 2 head of horses, and a colt that arrived in San Angelo. We were brought over to our new home, which was just built about 1.5 miles west of Robert Lee, Texas. My sweet youngest daughter, Carrie Belle, at age 20, was married to a man named Seagraves when she came for a visit in 1907. She became ill and passed away during her visit on August 13th of that year. Mary Jane and I had been familiar with the experience of losing a child. We lost our first daughter, Sarah, at age 5, and our second child, William, the day he was born. Edward and Mary lived to adulthood, but we lost our son Henry only 20 days after his birth. Garrett, Eddie, and Goda would live to old age, and we lost our twins before Carrie Belle was born. What a heartbreak it was to lose her. We buried her in Robert Lee Cemetery.
Carey Allen retired from farming sometime around 1910 and spent most of his remaining years in the home he loved so much in Robert Lee. He was 91 years old on October 5, 1925, when his second wife Elizabeth passed away. His mind was still active, and he continued to read and keep up with world affairs, right up until the time of his going in 1927. His story was lovingly written by his daughter, Gates Roan.